is Frank Honus, and I want to welcome you to the Pure Life Podcast. For 13 years of my life, I lived with so many secrets. I walked in guilt and shame over hidden struggles I hadn't told anyone about. Since the age of 13 years old, I had been addicted to pornography. So many times, I tried to stop looking at porn on my own, but I failed every time. It really wasn't until I experienced brokenness over my sin and sought the help of other men who had once struggled just like me. Today, it's by the grace of God that I'm walking in freedom and recovery. And just like those who helped me, it's my desire to help men and women break free from the chains of sexual addiction. The mission of the Pure Life Podcast is to help individuals live with sexual integrity through Jesus Christ. Thanks for listening and enjoy the podcast. Hey everyone, this is Frank Honus, and I want to welcome you to episode 105 of the Pure Life Podcast. I'm excited and honored and privileged to be with a really cool guy today named Jonathan Daugherty, who is the leader and I believe founder. Is that right, Jonathan? Founder of Be Broken?
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Jonathan is the founder of Be Broken Ministries, a very, very significant, important ministry out there. Dedicated to helping men, individuals find sexual purity. Jonathan has a passion to help men and women, primarily men, with their sexual integrity, and just really excited to be able to talk with him today, this week on the podcast. And we're going to talk about a specific topic within recovery called grace-based recovery. I talked with Jonathan a little while back on the phone, and I could tell as I was listening to him on the phone, he just had so much passion for this, and he was, I was getting fired up because, we're both believers and we both love Jesus, and yet I've never heard recovery kind of explained in such a great, just such a powerful way. And so he's going to share a little bit about that. But before we do, I guess I just want to jump in, John. So who is Jonathan Daugherty? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and Be Broken Ministries and whatever else you want to share?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I appreciate it, Frank, and I'm glad to be here and appreciate the opportunity to share with you and your listeners just about some things that God has been doing over the years in my life and continues to do. I'm just a regular guy. I'm not Dr. Daugherty. I'm just, I don't have any special letters after my name or anything like that. And actually, believe it or not, I think that was strategic on God's part because we really value story in our work, in our ministry. And so one of the things that we realize is the best way that we can connect with each other and the best way we can minister to one another is when we lead with our story. Honestly, what I've found in this ministry is that very few people care what I know, but they do connect with my story. And so, I was raised in a Christian home. I've kind of known the difference between right and wrong really since I was, can remember. And when I was introduced to porn at 12 years old, it was a very difficult experience for me because I had, on the one hand, it's like I had this feeling like something, even though I couldn't tell you what it is, something doesn't feel right about this. But at the same time, it was very exciting, and something was kind of came awake in me that I didn't know about. And so that started a whole journey for me of kind of getting into exploring my sexuality in ways that weren't necessarily healthy. Lots of pornography and fantasy and masturbation all the way through junior high and high school. And the whole time, so on the one hand, I've got what I believe is healthy, good information that's coming to me from my parents and the church about sexuality and the goodness of it and the value of it, and that it's to be protected, and there's something so valuable about it that God's made it for this context of marriage, and there's all this great treasure to it. But the whole while, I'm also over here experimenting and exploring and all these other things that seem to feel so good, even if they're across this boundary line of what seems to be right. Eventually I got involved in, not just pornography. I got involved in sexual relationships with girls in college, and got married thinking that would cure me. A lot of guys think, hey, if I just get married, all of a sudden, poof, the problem goes away. I won't struggle with porn. I won't struggle with lust. And clearly that didn't happen. Any guys out there that are listening that are married, it doesn't just magically disappear. So I brought my addiction into my marriage, and it continued. And the first 4 years of my marriage, it was literally a hell on earth. It eventually included prostitutes and strip clubs and all other kinds of things. And so for me, kind of the rock bottom experience was 1999 when my wife finally left. All the stuff came out, and that was enough. She was like, I'm done. And that was actually the catalyst that God used to sort of wake me up and get me thinking again in terms of what really matters, what really matters going forward, because I had pushed everybody away in my life and thinking, because that's really what the addiction teaches us. Sexual addiction teaches us that life is all about me, and so I need to be the center of the universe, and if everything and everyone in my life could eventually just serve me, then I'll be absolutely happy and content. Well, guess what? I got everything I wanted. I got it just being all about me. The problem is where it led me was not where I thought it would lead me. It led me to being completely and totally alone. And that was a miserable place. And so 1999 was the beginning of my recovery, where I finally admitted that I was weak, admitted I didn't know what I was doing, admitted that I was, powerless, so to speak, to overcome this. And I've been on that journey ever since. And what happened in those early years, what really was the foundation that was laid for me in recovery, was this issue of grace. And it really started day one for me, because the day my wife left was day one of my recovery. And kind of the way it happened for me was I had this profound experience with God's grace in that day that I'd never had before. I'd understood kind of in my head maybe what the Bible had said about grace and what Jesus spoke of when he talked about grace, and but I never really embraced, I never really felt it in the sense of that's something that goes to the core of my being. But when my wife left, I eventually just broke down on the floor. Because I was tired, I was depressed, I was suicidal, and I broke down. And I was kind of expecting in that moment that God would, that's the moment that he was going to wag his finger at me and really just give me what for. It's like, okay, now I'm going to give you your woodshed experience. Now you know what I'm talking about. That kind of thing. Kind of an angry God ready to go whip me. And instead what happened was I had this sense of Christ crawling on the floor to me and putting his arm around me. And it never entered my mind that Jesus would crawl on the floor. I just never had this picture of him like that. And so that was my first, I would say, profound experience with grace. Here I am, I had completely trashed my life, been horrible to my wife, been just basically a jerk to live with, completely self-centered, totally self-absorbed, and yet God wanted to care for me. God wanted to love me. And I thought, that does not, even though maybe intellectually I had understood that as a Christian and as a believer, but man, I'd never experienced it. And so I was like, this is totally different to my experience of life. I've always thought, you get what you deserve, and you're going to, if you do all these stupid, horrible things, it's going to come back to you, and you're going to get what you deserve. And
right.
So to experience grace, it really messed with my head, but in a good way. And I was like, I want more of this. I want to understand what this is. And that really began the last 15 years of a journey of just trying to understand more and more about what actually causes transformation in recovery. What is the actual engine, so to speak, that drives us toward purity and sobriety and freedom?
Yeah.
And I have come to believe, and where I stand is, I really believe that engine is grace. It's not rules. It's not, it's not even accountability in the way that a lot of people think of accountability. Like, I just need a cop that's going to watch everything I do and make sure that I stay, in line and all this. I have really come to believe that it's grace, and grace is simply undeserved favor, or like undeserved kindness. And if you think about this, if your listeners, if anybody's been involved in any sort of like addiction communities, whether it's AA or maybe some sex addiction recovery, narcotics, and all, just an addiction community, we understand this on kind of an intuitive level, but we find it hard to do on a practical level. What I mean by that is, when you get guys in a group, gals or whatever, anybody that's struggling with an addiction, when you get them in a group and actual help starts to engage them. In other words, people come in that group and say, "I want to help you. I want to be a sponsor. I'm going to mentor you. I'm going to help you." We intuitively know that the only way that they're going to get to where they need to go is that somebody comes to them and gives them kindness and favor that they don't deserve. It's kind of like the introduction to recovery. You don't get there by somebody coming to you and saying, "Hey, you walked in this room, I'm going to beat you to a pulp and make you recover." No, otherwise they'll never come back, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So we already know this intuitively. When somebody steps into a group, in order for them to even get to the next step, they have to be welcomed. And that's a grace-based environment. That's grace. That's saying, "Listen, you have totally screwed up your life. We know that, but you are welcome here." And that's the beginning, I think, of laying a foundation of grace. And so I think there's a lot more to it, because I do think it also has to do with identity. Because to me, one of the fundamental cores of a grace-based environment is saying that this place, whether it be a group environment or accountability relationship, or maybe a mentor sponsor to sponsee type relationship, the key is that saying, in this environment, there is nothing that you could do that would cause me to walk away. In other words, it's absolutely and totally safe, and because there's nothing that you could do that would change your value or your worth. You aren't valuable because you do fill in the blank. You're valuable because you're a human being. And when that is like a foundation that says your identity, like your worth as a human being, is not going to fluctuate whether you don't act out or you do act out, all of a sudden this person might be able to start engaging hope. They can start realizing that, while the goal is that we get to a place where you're not engaging in all these behaviors, where you're going to get the strength, the momentum, the energy to do that is from a grace-based environment, one that says your worth is not going to fluctuate with the messiness of your recovery. Because you know this, Frank, I mean, recovery is messy.
Oh, yeah.
It's like you have ups and you have downs and you have sideways, And if somehow you get it into your mind that your worth, your value as a human being, is going to fluctuate in the same way that the messiness of your recovery does, man, you're going to be in for a really difficult journey. Because what happens on that day that you have a crash? It's not going to just be about that you went and you acted out. It's going to be that you identify yourself with that behavior. You identify your worth as a scumbag because, man, I just crashed. In the same way, I think we heighten our worth and our value when we say, "I had a great day, so therefore I'm the stud of the universe. I'm awesome." It's like we lose a perspective of humility.
Yeah, right.
If we're doing great, and then it also it causes us to think from a prideful perspective that says, "Look at what I did."
Yeah.
Forgetting that really it's by the grace of God that we're able to take steps forward and move toward better health and recovery.
So it's kind of taken a little bit of the emphasis off of the person's behavior. Not that you don't help the person improve their behavior or change their behavior, but you're taking the emphasis off of that into embracing the whole person's value and worth, and helping them to see their acceptance, love for that person, acceptance, that welcome kind of spirit. Because I think there's a lot of shame there,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
When people just feel that sense of, if I don't have all my I's dotted, my T's crossed, and I'm not to this place in my recovery at 2 months or 6 months or whatever, then I'm going to be rejected or asked to leave the group. Or
Right.
is that kind of make sense? Or
Absolutely. And I think, to me, it's changing our view of what is the engine of
okay,
recovery. I think for the most part, most recovery programs, they're kind of, whether they mean to do this or not, and again, this isn't about what necessarily recovery programs are always intending to do, but sometimes the way it comes across is that it can often come across as the engine of recovery is your behavior.
sure,
So in other words, like, what's going to drive your recovery is what you do. And what we're trying to say is, actually, behaviors are always birthed out of your identity, how you see yourself. And so we believe that it's birthed out of what you believe. And so and that's why a lot of times if you think about what an addict is doing, you can find that there's core beliefs that are driving that.
mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that this is like that again, we're not wagging a finger at an addict and heaping shame on them, but I had to look at my own life and I had to say, okay, what is ultimately driving what I'm doing? Oh my goodness, I got all these false shame lies, I've got all these false beliefs about who I am and what my worth is. And as I started working on that in a grace-based environment where I knew that my worth doesn't change based on what I do,
Mm-hmm.
a foundation started to be laid that said, Jonathan, you are a valuable child of God, made in His image. He loves you, He cherishes you, and there's nothing that you could ever do that would make Him love you any less. From that foundation, I could start building behaviors that grow out of that.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is if the engine is behavior, then you're going to be, at best, I believe you're going to be in a constant state of exhaustion. Because you're constantly going to, it's like a hamster in a wheel. You're constantly having to manage your behaviors and kind of feeling like you're getting nowhere because you might have, 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, and, you're just huffing and puffing and manage. And this is why there's a lot of people that have been in recovery programs for 20 years, and they don't necessarily feel any more free today as they did, 6 months into their recovery. And it's because they've got this mentality that says the engine that is driving my recovery is my behavior. And what we like to say is the engine that's driving transformation is grace. And when you have grace as the foundation, not only in how you see yourself and your identity, but we believe you need grace-based environments.
Mm-hmm.
Places where it's like, yes, we have goals. We have, in our Christian faith, Christ set the standard. We have something to shoot for and aim for, but it better be by grace because we're all imperfect, broken people.
Mm-hmm.
So in that environment, we can keep encouraging one another to improve, but our worth and our value isn't based on whether or not we've, hit the target every single time. And so in that way, interestingly enough, it's very counterintuitive because in our culture, it's all about results, right? We want to see.
Oh, yeah.
We want to see results, and we want to see them fast. But it's a counterintuitive thing because what we've seen is if you'll engage this long process of really establishing a grace-based foundation, then not only do eventually behaviors clean up, but even your desires change.
Mm.
Because a lot of times when a program keeps you focused on your behavior, guess what you keep looking at over and over and over again? You keep looking at your brokenness. You keep looking at the very thing that you're trying to actually heal from. You keep looking at the very thing that you're actually trying to change.
Okay.
And I want to be careful about this because I'm not saying that we ignore our brokenness. I'm not saying that we never look at our histories and that we don't look at our pain. I echo what the Apostle Paul said when he said, I'll boast in my weaknesses so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. He didn't forget all of his weaknesses. He actually said, I'll boast in them but for the reason of saying, hey, I know that when I'm weak, then I'm strong.
Uh-huh.
And so it's not, it's not like we ignore our weaknesses, but what I'm saying is if we make it all about our behaviors, then we're going to keep looking at that again and again and again and again, and probably means we're going to keep going in the direction that we're looking.
Okay.
And I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yeah, so practically then, what is that? So understanding the foundation of grace-based recovery, what I tend to keep hearing here kind of is this understanding of my identity and who am I really, and understanding my value and my worth in Christ, and really building that as a philosophy for my recovery, not just works, not just my behavior. So for you then, and for your ministry, and because this is definitely radical compared to, and I don't mean radical, I just mean this is different compared to a lot of different recovery models that I've seen,
sure,
where that do emphasize a lot of work on the behavior, and like you said, not that we should ignore that, but
right.
So then practically, how does that translate for you guys from understanding who we are, our identity, our value, our worth? Now, and you mentioned grace-based environments. So what principles, what practical things do you kind of teach your guys to begin walking in, to once they understand their value and their worth and the identity piece, then what?
Yeah, and really it boils down to repetition.
Okay.
And really having lots and lots of reminders, because honestly, when you think about it, if somebody's developed sort of a full-blown sexual addiction, their mind and their heart is completely filled with lots of deception and lies and shame.
Sure.
Shame is the greatest enemy to a person's true identity in terms of them understanding who they really are. Because shame will always attack you at the core of your worth. It's different from like guilt, which says you've made a mistake, you did something that was wrong. Shame actually says you are wrong, you are a mistake.
Yeah.
And that's fun. That's huge in terms of how that translates into your being. It's one thing to be able to say, yeah, I'm going to look at my behaviors, I'm going to look at some of the stuff I'm doing, and we can objectively say, guess what, that crossed the line of what's healthy and good. Okay, fine. Then let's address it that way. Not saying, and therefore, you're a piece of scum, you're a pervert, you're a horrible,
right.
Blot on the face of the earth. It's like, no, your value didn't change. You stepped across the line. And so in that sense, what we're able to do, let's use it in like a group setting. If we're in a group and we're trying to create a grace-based environment, we're saying you are always welcome here. You failed every week for 6 months, you're still welcome to come in this place. We're not going to lower the standard. We're not going to change where we're trying to help you grow, but you are always welcome here. That's grace. That's something they don't deserve. I mean, we almost, I think intuitively we have this sense of justice. I think it's part of us being made in the image of God. We have a sense of justice. Like, we see something that's wrong again and again and again and again, and we say, that needs to be corrected or that needs to be punished. It's like we have this natural sense of that. Grace says, while that is true, we're gonna operate almost under a higher law that says you do deserve to be punched in the face for 6 months of repeated failure. But you're not going to get that in this space, because our ultimate goal for you is that you live a life of purity and freedom. And guess what? It does us no good, and it does you no good if we punch you in the face for failing. It just doesn't do anybody any good. So on a practical sense, what that means is we keep saying, listen, the standard is to continue moving towards greater purity. We're never going to be absolutely perfect, but we're not going to say, oh, it doesn't matter if you keep failing. I hope your listeners aren't hearing that, because that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying if a guy comes in for 6 months, week after week, and he's continued to confess that he fails, that doesn't matter at all. Yeah, that needs to be addressed, but in light of his worth and value as a human being. And part of it too, Frank, is when somebody begins to understand their identity as this worthy child of God, somebody that's valued and just has intrinsic worth because they're a human being, We're called sons and daughters of God. We're called servants. We are called friends of God. When you start understanding kind of what your identity is, you go, okay, well, how would a son of the king behave?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you probably wouldn't be hanging around on the wrong side of town. You wouldn't be eating out of a pig trough. You wouldn't be, you start getting an idea of, well, what does it look like to be a son or a daughter of the king? You have a high position. You have a great stature. You've been given something of great worth and value in that identity. And so the idea is we want to keep reminding people of that so that they begin to live out who they already are. Not trying to manufacture themselves into someone, but instead, as you start to understand what your core identity is, guess what starts to happen? Your behaviors start to reflect who you actually are.
Sure.
And to me, that's the key of grace-based recovery, is saying it takes a long time for a person to actually embrace who they really are. Because it takes a lot to unravel all of those lies of shame that have been building up year after year after year in their addiction. Yeah. So it's a much longer process. That's why I think a lot of times it's easier to go the route of behavior modification, because it's like it's external, we can see it, we can measure it, it's simple, it's easy, but it never really addresses like the underlying issues of the identity. Which is why you can have people that are quote-unquote in recovery for years and years and years, and yet they have to maintain and continually be in a management mode of their behaviors because they're never actually reaching a place of freedom. They might be sober in the sense that they are not acting out in their behaviors, but there's this, I've met a lot of people, there's this gnawing sense in their spirit that they're still bound to their addiction. They're just not acting out. It's kind of like the dry drunk idea. A guy who maybe hadn't had a drink in 20 years, but he's just every bit as much of an alcoholic in his heart as he was 20 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so many questions come to my mind, but we'll have to, we'll just have to pick up the conversation, do it again sometime. But here's a last question I kind of want to ask, and you can check out more on Jonathan and Be Broken Ministries. BeBroken.net is the website.
BeBroken.com. Sorry.
I'm sorry, Jonathan. BeBroken.com. BeBroken.com. And to find out more about Jonathan and grace-based recovery, lots of really great information on there. And then, what's your personal website, Jonathan, if you don't mind giving that? Is it Jonathan Daugherty?
It's JonathanDaugherty.com, yeah.
And you can learn more about Jonathan there. Here's my last question, I guess, Jonathan, is that, so, all right, for the man who he's understanding his worth, his value, his identity in Christ, that he is loved, that he's cherished, guys like, I mean, us guys, we like tools, and we like conquering, we like fix, the ways to fix things, and we're task managers, and we like doing things, and like you said, we're trying to get away from this sense of doing, and behavior. But do you put tools into guys' hands? Do you encourage, recommend different kinds of things to help their behavior, or do you allow those things to kind of organically kind of spring about by their belief about themselves and the foundation? How does that kind of work?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the dance that we always have to do is the fact that, listen, we want to build things on the foundation of grace, and our whole ministry is principle based, meaning we don't necessarily lock people into a particular method, but the principles of recovery and purity, they are the same no matter what method you use. And so, at the risk of sounding sort of self-promoting here, I did write a book called The 4 Pillars of Purity. And that book gives like the basic foundational principles of living a life of sexual purity. And then there's, guess what? The back of the book, there's resources, there's suggestions, there's things like, okay, here's some things that you can do. And that's always a difficult thing, because it's like we want guys to focus more on the principles, because it's out of that the life transformation is going to happen. But you're right, we tend to gravitate more quickly to the tools. And the reason I keep harping a lot on the grace-based aspect is I just want to help guys understand, let's not get the cart before the horse. listen, I'm not anti-method, but I think your foundation has got to be on the right principles, because sometimes if you get the method like ahead of the principles, then you're going to get confused about what's actually causing transformation and whether or not you're actually changing.
Okay.
You might see behaviors modified, but might not see freedom and transformation on a heart level.
So then we can liken the engine to the principles, and the car would be more or less the method. I mean, you can go out and get any kind of car, but that engine's got to be working really, really well. And if the engine's not if the engine's not working and running smooth, and it's not being taken care of, then that car is not going anywhere. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, you can put whatever body you want to on that engine, and that's kind of the method. And one guy may want a sports car, another guy wants a pickup truck, but it's like just you need a powerful engine underneath there.
Right, and different cars work for different men, so
right.
I appreciate that. Yeah. Well, listen. I other than our technical difficulties, man, this has been very, very refreshing and encouraging, and I hope maybe I can schedule a time with you. We can get some more conversation in about this. I know you're a coffee lover. I see that on your
oh, absolutely, yeah.
So that's I love coffee, man. We'll have to talk coffee sometime. If you're like, do you roast? Do you grind? Do you just go out?
Hey, listen, I'm not that deep into it. I'm more like I want to try. I've got a Keurig, and I just try all the different K cups and stuff. And I'm not that. I've known some guys that are like, I mean, they're totally into their own roasting and everything, and I'm not quite there.
Yeah, I saw your recent tweet about you were coming off a juice fast, or you were doing a juice fast, and one thing my brother here said is it's one thing he could never give up would be his coffee. So.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, Jonathan, listen, thank you again so much. Really appreciate it. Again, go to bebroken.com and check out Jonathan Daugherty's ministry, and I know that he very humble guy, and this is not about him whatsoever. It's about what the Lord is doing. I'd like to be able to maybe sometime talk to you a little bit about what do you feel like the church's role should be in the life of a man. How do you feel like the church should intercede? Because I question sometimes whether we're at a place, universally, the church, where it's a safe place for a man to come out and share his addiction, his struggles. But that's for another time. Anyway, Jonathan, thank you so much. I appreciate your time today, man.
Yeah, thanks, Frank.
All right, thank you. Hey everyone, thanks for listening and watching the podcast this week. I want to encourage you to check out purelifepodcast.com. There's lots of great free resources, blogs, and podcasts from previous episodes to help you along with your journey through sexual purity. You can also check us out on iTunes and Stitcher Radio, and now watch the podcast on YouTube. Also find us on Twitter and Facebook, and if you need to email me or contact me with any questions, comments, or feedback, you can email me at frank@purelifepodcast.com. That's frank@purelifepodcast.com. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time on the Pure Life Podcast.